In almost 10 years of wearing a badge, I have answered thousands of calls I barely remember now. The one that still haunts me in my dreams every night began as a routine welfare check on an older woman in a cabin at the end of a narrow hollow in the Great Smoky Mountains. It ended with me on the ground, trying to fight off something massive that I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmare, something that most people would call a dogman or a werewolf. This whole thing happened 8 years ago, when I was still green. Dispatch gave it to me as a routine check on an older female out in one of the hollows near the park boundary, Grace Reynolds. The name caught my attention before the address did. I had heard it plenty of times in the couple of years I had been with the sheriff's office. She was the lady everyone in that part of the county thought was crazy. The story on her, the way I had always heard it, was that she had been talking about monsters and strange animals to anyone who would listen for years. Neighbors, folks in town, anyone sitting near her at the diner or the feed store. It was one of those open secrets people passed around with a shake of the head. As far as our side of things went, though, she had only ever called the sheriff's office once, a decade earlier, when her husband went missing out here. That report had gone cold and slid into the stack of unsolved disappearances long before I ever pinned on a badge. I had driven past her place a few times before. From the road, it looked like any other older mountain cabin tucked back in the trees. Small clearing, gray wood siding, single power line, narrow driveway. I had never seen anything unusual there. I had never spoken to her in person either. I assumed most of what people said about her came down to age, loneliness, and too many nights spent out there by herself. That was my mindset when I keyed up and told dispatch I would take the call. For context, at the time of this incident, I was 27 years old and a little over 2 years into the job. I grew up in the same county, hunting and fishing in the foothills of the Smokies, and I considered myself comfortable in the woods after dark. My duty gear that night was standard: a Glock 40 caliber pistol, a taser, pepper spray, a radio, and a flashlight. No body cam. Our department is small, and that just wasn't in the budget yet. Grace's cabin was a few miles off the main highway, back in one of those narrow hollows that only have a handful of houses on them. Cell reception in that area was hit or miss, and the radio could be spotty once you got past the first ridge. Dispatch knew I would probably drop in and out of contact for a while. The drive out there was straightforward. It was early fall, cool but not cold, with low cloud cover that blocked out most of the moonlight. Once I turned onto the smaller county road, the houses thinned out quickly. By the time I reached her gravel road, it was fully dark in the bottoms. There were no other porch lights visible once I got halfway down the hollow. Her driveway came up on the left as a narrow cut between two big poplars. I swung the cruiser in and let the tires bump over a shallow ditch. The cabin sat maybe 50 or 60 yards back from the road on a slight rise, with enough space cleared to park a couple of vehicles and a small yard. Beyond that, the tree line surrounded the place on all sides. She had a single porch light on above the front steps. In that pool of light, I could see her front door, an old wooden rocker, and most noticeably, a black and white border collie pressed up against the front window. The night was quiet. No traffic noise, no nearby voices, just the faint sound of a creek somewhere down in the hollow. I parked in front of the porch, let dispatch know I was out at the address, and stepped into the yard with my flashlight in hand. I swept the light across the yard, over the trees, and then up onto the porch. Nothing jumped out at me. No car in the drive besides my own. Up close, the dog looked more alert than anything else. It gave a couple of short barks, then quieted and watched me come up the walk. I climbed the steps and knocked on the doorframe. The dog paced a couple of steps back from the door, glancing from me to the front window, but it did not charge or throw itself against the glass as I heard the chains slide back and the deadbolt turn. When she opened the door, she looked about as I expected. Thin, frail, late 70s by my guess, long gray hair tied back, face lined from years outdoors. She wore a plain cardigan and house shoes and had a tired but steady look in her eyes. "Evening, ma'am," I said. "Sheriff's office. We got a call to come check on you. Make sure you're all right." Grace peered past me for a moment, out into the yard and toward the trees, then looked back at my badge and uniform. There was a flicker of recognition there. "I'm fine," she said. Her voice was steady but tired. "Come in if you want. I was just about to put the kettle back on." Under normal circumstances, I might have kept the contact at the door, verified that she was up and talking, and cleared the call. But she was old and probably had some mental issues, so I decided it was worth taking a few extra minutes to find out what was going on. Grace stepped back to let me pass. The border collie hovered a few feet inside, then came over for a quick sniff. I held my hand out and let it smell. The dog was curious, not aggressive. The interior was small but neat. A worn couch, a couple of chairs, a low table with a stack of crossword books, and a tiny kitchen area with a kettle already sitting on the stove. Family photos lined one wall. In most of them, Grace was younger, standing beside a heavy-set man in work clothes in front of the same cabin. "Have a seat," she said, gesturing toward one of the chairs. "I'll fix you some tea." I sat in the chair that gave me a clear view of the front door and windows, more out of habit than suspicion, and watched as she moved around the little kitchen. The dog settled between her and the door, still glancing back toward the front window. "My name's Daniel," I told her, keeping my tone conversational. "Deputy with the county. We just had some folks call in, said they hadn't seen you in a bit, and wanted us to check on you. Better to bother you for nothing than miss something important." Grace made a small sound that might have been a laugh, might have been something else. The kettle began to hiss on the burner. Outside, the yard and tree line were just dark shapes beyond the glass. That was how the visit started. Grace poured the hot water and set a chipped mug down in front of me without asking how I took it. I thanked her and let it sit. I was more interested in why nobody had seen her in a while than in the drink. "I appreciate you letting me in," I said. "Folks in town are worried? When's the last time you were out and about?" She shrugged one shoulder. "I don't keep track. I don't go to town much. Don't like it down there anymore." Her speech was clear. She knew where she was, knew who she was talking to, and seemed oriented to time. From a welfare standpoint, that checked some boxes. The dog came over to my knee again, sniffed my pant leg, accepted a quick pat on the head, then went back to its spot between her and the front window. Its ears stayed forward. Every so often, it glanced at the glass like it expected something to appear there. I took out my notebook, more out of habit than because I thought I'd need it. "I'm glad you're all right," I said. "But since I'm here, why don't you tell me what's been going on lately? Anything out of the ordinary? Any problems you've been having?" Grace gave me a look I had seen before on older people who had been dismissed one too many times. It was a mix of irritation and resignation. "You wouldn't believe me," she said. "Nobody does." "I get that a lot," I said. "My job's not to decide if I like it. My job's to write down what you tell me and do what I can about it. So go ahead." She shook her head and turned back to the stove for a moment, adjusting the burner under the kettle. When she faced me again, her eyes drifted to the dog. "It comes around here at night," she said. "Has for a long time now. Walks around the yard. Watches. It wants the dog. It's been looking at him like he's the last piece of meat on earth." "How often are we talking?" I asked. "Most nights," she said. "Some more than others. Sometimes I just know it's out there. Sometimes I see it. Depends on how bold it feels." Her tone was flat. She wasn't trying to sell it to me or dramatize anything. It sounded more like she was reporting a weather pattern. "You said it," I said. "You talking about a person, an animal, what?" She studied me for a second, as if deciding how much effort to spend. "You'll say it was a bear, or a big dog, or that I was sleeping and dreamed it," she said. "That's what they said when my husband went missing. I know what I saw." I just nodded. "Right now, just tell me how things have been the last few weeks. Any damage, footprints, anything like that?" She shook her head. "No damage. I've tried to shoot it a few times with my husband's old shotgun. It doesn't come close when I'm up because it knows I can hurt it. But it seems to know when I'm asleep. Then it comes closer and walks around the cabin. Scratches at the siding now and then. Let me know it's out there. Then the dog starts barking, and it vanishes into the woods." The dog gave a soft chuff at the word scratch, then went silent again, staring at the front window. Its tail made a small, uncertain motion. "Has it tried to get in lately?" I asked. "No," she said. "Not yet. It's too smart for that. The moment it breaks down the door, it would catch a slug." She looked down at the dog. I think it's waiting for him to stray too far. Maybe it wants to kill him first so it can get to me. I made a note about a possible predator around the property, mostly to justify my time on the paperwork later. From a law enforcement standpoint, I had an elderly woman in a remote cabin reporting something in the dark, and a dog that was acting a little more watchful than usual. I had heard worse. I got up and walked to the front window, more to make her feel heard than because I expected to see anything. The yard looked the same as before. Cruiser out front, porch light shining into a short strip of grass, then solid shadow where the trees started. I used my flashlight to punch the beam out toward the tree line. Nothing jumped or moved. "Looks clear from here," I said. "Any other issues? Has anybody been bothering you? Strangers, vehicles you don't recognize?" "No," she said. "Nobody comes up here but you people, and that thing." We went back and forth like that for a few minutes. I asked the standard welfare questions: medications, any recent falls, any trouble getting food. Grace had a nephew who dropped off supplies when she needed them. Physically, she was doing better than some people in town. Mentally, she had a fixed story about something outside the house at night. That was not something I was going to resolve in one visit. After a while, I finished my tea, closed my notebook, and stood up. "All right, ma'am," I said. "Far as I can tell, you're doing okay. I'm going to head back out and clear you with dispatch. If you ever feel like you're in immediate danger, you still call 911. Even if it's just that you're scared, that's what we're here for." Grace nodded, but didn't look convinced. I stepped out onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind me. I walked down the steps and toward the cruiser, already thinking through the short welfare summary I was going to give dispatch. Halfway to the car, I glanced toward the tree line out of habit. At first, it just registered as a darker, vertical shape against the line of trees, maybe 20 or 30 yards out, slightly off to the right of the cabin. Then my eyes adjusted, and I realized it wasn't a tree. I stopped dead in my tracks. Something was standing there. In the weak spill from the porch light, I saw 2 points reflect back at me from about where a person's eyes ought to be, except they were set a little wider apart. It was tall, at least my height, probably more, and broad through the shoulders. I could not make out details, just the outline and the eye shine. It stood perfectly still, facing the house. I slid my hand down to my belt and pulled my flashlight. I brought it up, thumb on the switch, and aimed it at the shape. The moment the beam snapped on and hit it, the thing dropped low and bolted sideways into the trees. For a second, I caught more than just an outline. Whatever it was went down on 4 legs, like it was falling forward, and I saw a flash of something that looked like dark, oily fur. The way it moved was wrong for any man I had ever seen run. It was enough to tell me I was not looking at some drunk neighbor or a kid messing around. I kept the beam on the tree line, but it was already gone. I did not stand out there trying to talk myself into a better explanation. I turned and went straight back to the cabin. I knocked hard once out of habit, then opened the door and stepped inside, closing it firmly behind me. The dog was already there, nails clicking on the floor, body angled toward the front window. Grace stood a few feet back, watching my face. "You saw it?" she said. This time it was not a guess. I did not answer. I engaged the deadbolt and checked the latch on the door without thinking about it. "I saw something," I said. "It moved when I lit it up. I want you to tell me everything, from the start." Grace looked past me toward the window, then back at me. Some of the tiredness had dropped out of her expression. What was left was just intent. "It was over 10 years ago," she began. "Dusk, early fall, not so different from tonight." Grace pointed toward the back of the house. "Tom was out there in the kitchen when he heard something knocking around by the shed. We'd had a bear through here that summer, so he figured it was back. He grabbed the old shotgun and said he was going to run it off before it tore into anything. I stayed right there by that window and watched him go out. He walked out into the yard and shouted at it, like he always did with black bears. Told it to piss off, fired the gun into the air once. I saw something move at the edge of the trees. I thought it was a big man at first. Then it stepped out. It was tall, taller than him, and he was a big man. It really looked like a man built thick, but all of it was covered in fur. Dark fur. Not a coat or anything like that. It was on its skin. The arms were wrong, too long, The hands had claws, not paws. I saw them when he reached for him. Same with the feet. It stood up like a man, but when it moved, it used those feet like an animal. I don't know how to explain the face except to say it looked like a wolf that had gone bad somehow. Thick, long jaws, big teeth, not neat like a dog's, jagged, and eyes that didn't look like any animal I ever saw. Tom just stood there, shotgun pointed down. He must have been in shock. When he finally raised the gun, the thing charged. It threw itself forward and ran on two legs. God, it was fast. Tom managed to fire his second barrel, but he must have missed it. It slammed into him, and they both flew through the air. When he was down on the ground, it bit down, on his neck and his shoulder, all crushed in one single bite. He screamed. God, those screams. I can still hear him every time I close my eyes. Then it dragged him off into the trees, just like that. There was nothing I could do but stand there, cry, and watch that thing tear him apart. That was the last I've ever seen of my husband. Her voice stayed flat the entire time. She didn't cry, didn't waver. As unbelievable as her story sounded, Grace didn't strike me as confused or mentally ill in any way. She said she called the sheriff's office that night. It started raining before the deputies arrived. They searched the yard and the woods. There was some disturbed ground, but no body, no clear prints, nothing that would stand up in a report. Eventually, the case was filed as a missing person with no evidence of foul play. They said that I was confused, or that he walked out on me, and I made up a story so I wouldn't have to admit it. I heard all of it. For several years after that, she said, the woods stayed quiet. She stayed in the cabin because it was her home and she had nowhere else to go. About a year ago it came back, she said. Same feeling, same sound out by the trees. I looked out and saw it again. Not up close, but enough to know it was the same thing. It didn't come straight for me. It stayed out there and watched. Grace looked down at the dog. I got him after Tom disappeared, she said. Trained as a service dog. Helps me around the house. Not much else to look after me these days. I think that thing sees him as a threat for some reason. It watches him more than me. I think it's waiting for a chance to take him, the same way it took Tom. So since then, I said, you've seen it again, out by the trees, mostly watching the house and the dog. It hasn't tried to get inside, and it hasn't made another move like it did with your husband? She nodded. Not yet, she said. But it's out there, and it's not going anywhere until it gets what it wants. I sat with that for a few seconds and looked at her across the small table. From a professional standpoint, I had an elderly woman alone in a remote cabin, convinced a large predator or something was targeting her dog. From a personal standpoint, I had just seen something in her trees that I could not explain away. Ma'am, I said, I don't know what that thing is, but I can tell you this isn't a great place for you to be tonight. I'd like you to come into town with me. We can get you a room at the motel, you and the dog both, just for a night or two. Let us take a proper look around out here in daylight. Grace shook her head almost before I finished. I'm not leaving this house, she said. I was born in it. I'll die in it. I understand how you feel, I said, but I'm telling you as plainly as I can. I saw something out there a few minutes ago. I don't know what it was, but it was big enough and close enough that I'm not comfortable just driving away and leaving you here like nothing happened. Come with me tonight. We can sort everything else out in the morning. Grace kept her eyes on mine for a long moment, then looked down at the dog. I've lived with it for a long time, she said. Longer than you've been wearing that batch. If it wants me dead, it can try its luck. Before I could answer, the dog got up. 1 second, it was lying at her feet. The next, it was up and on full alert, staring at the front window. A low growl came out of its chest, then a few short barks. Within a few heartbeats, it had gone from quiet to agitated. I felt the hair rise on my arms. Something was out there. Grace did not get up. She just put one hand on the table to steady herself and watched the window. It's here, she said. The dog backed up to the far side of the cabin, still barking, then shifted its weight like it was ready to bolt or fight, depending on which way things went. I checked the front door out of habit, even though I had just secured it. Then I went to the window and looked around the yard, one hand on my holster. There was nothing visible through the glass from where I stood. I checked the other windows, too, with the same result. Ma'am, I said, keeping my voice steady. We can still walk out of here right now. All three of us. I'll put you in the cruiser, and we'll be in town in 20 minutes. Grace shook her head again. No, she said. I told you. I'm not going. If it finally decides to come for me, then it comes. Maybe I'll see Tom again. I'm tired of waiting. That's not how this works, I said. I can't just leave you sitting here. I'm asking you one more time. Come with me. You can't make me, she said. There was no anger in it, just a statement. You know that. I'm in my right mind. You said so yourself. She wasn't wrong. I couldn't force a competent adult out of her own home because I didn't like her risk assessment, even if I thought it was awful. She glanced down at the dog, which had not stopped barking. Take him, she said. If it comes, it'll come for him first. I don't want it to hurt him. The dog flicked his eyes back at her when she said that, then at me, as if he understood more than he should. I did not like the idea of walking out of that cabin and leaving her inside with something in the trees, but I also knew I was not going to win the argument. All right, I said. Here's what we'll do. I'll take the dog with me and come back with help in the morning to look for whatever's been around your place. But you need to promise me you won't open this door for anything between now and then. You understand? I understand, she said. I stood up and moved to the small hook by the door where a leash hung. I clipped it to the dog's collar. He didn't resist. Even in this state, his training showed. Come on, buddy, I said. We're going for a ride. I drew my gun and held it down along my leg. Safety rules ingrained enough that I didn't have to think about them. With my other hand, I held the leash. I turned the deadbolt, cracked the door, and looked out. I didn't see any movement. Then I opened the door the rest of the way and stepped out onto the porch with the dog close to my leg and the pistol in my hand, getting ready to cross that strip of yard back to the cruiser. The dog was still nervous and growling, but the barking had stopped. I went down the steps with him at my side, keeping the pistol low but ready. The porch light covered some of the distance to the cruiser. Beyond that was just dark. We crossed the grass without anything jumping out at us. I kept my eyes on the trees as much as I could. The dog looked toward the tree line once, then back at the truck, tail tucked. Nothing moved. When we reached the cruiser, I opened the rear door on the passenger side and guided him up onto the seat. He hesitated for half a second, then climbed in like he had done it 100 times. I clipped the leash to the headrest so he couldn't bolt the second I opened the door again. Stay, I told him, more for myself than for him. I shut the door. The windows were up. The dog turned in a tight circle on the seat, then sat facing the cabin, ears up. I still had the gun in my hand. I took a breath, stepped back from the rear door, and started around the back of the cruiser to get to the driver's side. I kept my head on a swivel, scanning the woods and the edge of the yard, listening for anything out of the ordinary. I was a step or two from the driver's door when I saw something move in my peripheral vision, low and fast from the left. I turned toward it and instinctively brought the pistol up. I got one round off before it hit me. The impact was massive. It caught me high and to the side, and the next thing I knew, I was off my feet, sliding across the grass and dirt. I hit the ground on my stomach and skidded until my shoulder slammed into something hard. Over the ringing in my ears, I heard a high, tearing scream that didn't sound like any creature I knew. I must have hit it. It was close, somewhere behind me, on my side of the cruiser. Then I realized that the gun was no longer in my hand. I did not waste time trying to find the Glock. My hand went straight to the taser on my belt. I pulled it, flipped the safety, and brought it up just as the thing came at me again, around the rear corner of the cruiser. All I saw in that moment was bulk and movement. Dark fur, a broad chest, powerful arms coming forward. I fired center mass on reflex. The darts hit somewhere in the lower torso. The taser snapped and crackled in my hand. The effect was immediate but not complete. The thing jerked, let out some kind of distorted growl, and its legs seemed to go out from under it. It stumbled forward, pitching down and to the side, and for a second, it was almost on top of me. All weight and fur and a smell unlike anything I'd ever experienced. I had to gag hard while I rolled away and out of its way. One of its limbs clipped my boot as it hit the ground hard. I got my feet under me and moved fast toward the passenger side of the cruiser. dropping the now useless taser as I went. The dog was throwing itself against the inside of the rear door now, barking non-stop, but he was safe for the moment. The thing recovered quickly. It pushed itself up, shook once like it was trying to clear its head, and turned toward me again. I grabbed the pepper spray from my belt, my last line of defense. When it came at me again, I held my ground long enough to put a stream of spray straight into its face as it closed the last few yards. The effect was stronger than I thought. It recoiled, head snapping back, claws raking the air in front of it. It let out a sound that was more anger than pain and started swiping blindly, hitting the side of the cruiser hard enough to rock it on the suspension. I kept retreating toward the back of the vehicle, staying well out of reach, spraying in short bursts whenever I saw an opening. Then a gunshot went off. It came from further away, from the direction of the cabin. I saw the muzzle flash out of the corner of my eye and heard the round hit the thing's flesh with a thud. It staggered forward and fell down, into the dirt by the front wheel, limbs flailing wildly as it tried to catch itself. I risked a glance back and saw Grace in the open doorway, braced against the frame with an old shotgun in her hands. Before I could say anything, she fired again. The second load hit low, somewhere in the lower back area, as it tried to push itself up. It screamed, kicked, and tried to pull itself forward, claws tearing at the ground. I used that moment to move. I circled around the back of the cruiser, eyes on the ground, looking for my gun. I found the Glock on the ground, a few yards from the driver's door. I grabbed it and brought it up immediately. The thing was still on the far side of the cruiser. I could hear it, but I couldn't see it. It was probably still on the ground. I did not have a clean shot from where I was, so I moved around the front bumper, ready to put a few more holes in it while it was still down. As I cleared the front of the vehicle, I saw it again. It was on all fours now, trying to push itself upright. It had open wounds on its left shoulder and the left side of its lower back. As it turned its head toward me, the porch light caught part of its face, one cheek, part of the muzzle, and the teeth behind the lip. That was the closest look I got at it. The head was wrong in every way I knew for any animal. Too big, mismatching jaws, too many teeth. The eyes were squeezed shut and streaming from the spray, but they were set in a face that looked like a nightmare. Worse, there were some features that looked almost human. Bare, exposed skin, visible eyebrows and cheekbones, and a hint of expression in the face that reminded me more of a person than an animal. I tried to aim for the side of the head when I pulled the trigger, but this damn thing just kept jerking around. The pistol bucked, and I saw the round hit somewhere along the side of the face. It snapped its head away and let out another broken sound, then started scrambling in earnest. I fired again and again. One round missed. The other one struck somewhere around its right shoulder. It eventually managed to stand up on all fours and began to move, not in a straight run, but in a frantic, lurching scramble toward the tree line. I fired again and again, working the trigger as fast as I could, while still trying to get a proper aim. It took at least 3 more hits, but none of them near its head. Each impact made it jerk or stutter, but it did not stop or fall. I kept firing until it disappeared into the trees. I reloaded the Glock immediately, and for what felt like a few minutes, I stayed where I was, gun up, covering the gap in the trees where it had vanished. Nothing came back out. The brush had settled, and the screams and growls had stopped completely. I backed up until I could put the hood of the cruiser between me and the tree line, then stopped and forced myself to calm down. My hands were shaking more than I liked. I ran a quick mental check. I could move everything. Nothing felt broken, and the only pain that cut through the adrenaline was a deep ache in my right shoulder and ribs where it had hit me. I turned enough to see the cabin. Grace was still in the doorway, shotgun in hand. Her face was pale, but her stance was solid. "You all right?" I called. She nodded once. "Yes," she said. "You?" "I'll live," I said. My voice sounded flat in my own ears. The dog had gone quiet in the back of the cruiser. I did not try the radio until I was back down the hollow and close to the highway. There was no point. Once I saw the main road ahead, I called in, keeping it as simple as possible. I cleared the welfare check, noted that the resident was okay, and remaining on scene, reported minor damage to the cruiser and contact with a large unknown animal that had closed distance on me in the yard and fled wounded into the trees after I fired several shots. I did not need medical attention and was able to finish my shift. Because of the attack and my discharging the gun, I couldn't just let it go like Grace wanted me to. So I asked for a daylight follow-up with another unit and a game warden. Back in town, I wrote it up as an animal encounter with shots fired and minor damage to the vehicle. The official description was exactly what I had put on the air. Large, dark, quadruped, species unknown due to poor lighting and stress. The next morning, I was back out there with another deputy and a wildlife officer. In daylight, the yard looked almost normal. There were faint bloodstains on the ground and the grass, and a few patches of torn-up grass. The game warden walked the area, found and studied a few tracks, then said he couldn't draw any firm conclusions. There was enough evidence to support my claim of an animal attack, but not nearly enough to identify the animal. The report he wrote used careful language, large, canid-type animal, and unusual track morphology, but it landed in the same place as mine. Something big and aggressive had been in that yard and had taken a real punishment before it left. The warden flagged a few spots near the tree line where hair had snagged in the bark and took samples. A couple of trail cameras went up in the woods around the cabin. There was talk of setting a live trap, but the terrain and lack of a clear pattern worked against it. In the end, the plan was simple: monitor, respond if it came back, and hope the wounds had either killed it or driven it deeper into the mountains. After that, nothing more happened. I kept checking on Grace, but she hadn't seen it again after that night. No one else reported anything. I checked the camera footage with the warden twice. We saw raccoons, deer, a stray dog or two, and nothing that matched what I had seen that night. The entry I wrote for my report stayed exactly the same. I kept the dog at my place during that time with the department's blessing. On paper, he was listed as temporarily removed for his own safety while we evaluated the threat to the property. Off the record, everyone understood that an old woman living alone at the end of a hollow should not lose her only help and company any longer than absolutely necessary. When a month went by without a single incident, I took the dog back out to her cabin on my day off. She met me on the porch. I could see from the way the dog pulled on the leash that he knew where he was before we ever turned up the driveway. We didn't talk much, and I did not stay long. From that point on, I only went back to that hollow in daylight, and never alone. The report reads like a routine animal case. The reality, at least for me, is that there is something out there in those woods that took 2 shotgun rounds, a taser, enough pepper spray to drown a man, and half a magazine of .40 caliber rounds, and still had the strength to scramble away. Grace has chosen to live with that. I have chosen to believe that whatever damage we did to it that night was enough to make it think twice about coming back for her dog.